course, we dedicate this class to the memory and to the neshama of Adam Avraham ben Yaakov of blessed memory. There was a Pew survey that was taken in 2017, and apparently 33% of people in the United States believe in reincarnation. Some of them even atheists. About 39% of the people who believe in reincarnation are women. Not sure where that takes us to, but it's an interesting fact, and is something that we will, at the very end of today's class, we will talk about the power of the women in our generation. So how do you feel about reincarnation? There are many people. Raise your hand. Now that I could see everyone, I think I could see everyone. Well, raise your hand if, let me finish the question first. Raise your hand if you are fascinated by the concept of reincarnation. Raise your hand if you are at all disturbed by the concept of reincarnation. No? No one? Okay, so this is going to be a fascinating class then. Okay, so the truth is that there are many people who are fascinated because it counters feelings of mortality and worthlessness, because there's reincarnation. It reminds us there's more to the picture. It gives us appreciation for there being a past. There'll also be a future, even though we may not know or recognize the past or the future. But this idea of souls being recycled is something that many people have a very hard time with. A lot of people also have a hard time with the concept of reincarnation, because if our souls are reincarnated, so we're a soul that was here before. Now, I know I have my own baggage, a lot of challenges, okay? Personal challenges that I deal with. If my soul is reincarnated, so there's also baggage from the guy before me. I don't know who he was, but I may be dealing with that too. Maybe that's why life is so challenging, because I'm dealing with his as well. But that's part of the reason why there are many people who find this idea disturbing. Also because of my self-identity. You know, I think I'm a certain person, and then later I'm to find out that I'm, or I'll find out one day that I'm someone else, or I'll become someone else. And I was someone else. Okay, so here's an exercise. On page 175, we have an exercise. It's not going to be on the screen, but I'll read it, and we're going to get back. I'd like you to circle, and I'm going to ask everybody to circle all of them, and then we're going to do a raise of hands, true or false, and see where everybody's holding. If we're all on the same page, if we're on different pages, I'm sure we have different thoughts. So we'll start off with, and I want you to also circle what you think, if it's false, true or false. Belief in reincarnation is basic to Judaism. True? Raise your hand if you think that's true. No one raises their hand. False? And there's some people who are not sure. Okay. True or false? In the Jewish view, reincarnation means that a soul that inhabited one body returns to inhabit another. True or false? True? Anybody thinks it's false? Okay. A human soul can be reincarnated in a non-human entity, such as an animal or plant. True? Raise your hand. False? Raise your hand. Okay, I hope you're keeping score of your answers. This is going to be a lot of fun. Okay? A reincarnated soul does not have its own identity, but shares its identity with someone who lived in a previous lifetime. True? Raise your hand. False? Raise your hand. And then we have some who are not sure. Okay, next question. The purpose of doing good in one's current lifetime is to be reincarnated as a person of higher status. True? Is that true? False? Raise your hand. Okay, everybody thinks that's false. Now, actually, in I think in Indian belief, there is some truth to this. That the whole point is to come back into this world, to be reincarnated and go to a higher status.
But they also believe that you can become a cockroach too. We don't.
Okay, let's find out what we believe in. True or false? A soul is reincarnated as a penalty for sins committed in a prior life. True? Anyone for false? Okay, and the final question. Most souls today are reincarnations. True? Raise your hand. False? Raise your hand. You know, these questions are the best questions we've had in all the classes. Because for the first time, I know where everyone is holding, and I know that you're going to learn something from tonight's class. This is great. Okay, as I said, I don't profess to know everything on this subject, but we do have enough supporting text. We're going to begin to find out what Judaism believes in regards to reincarnation. Okay, so we're going to read a text on page 176, text number 1. This is actually a prayer. It's a very powerful prayer that is read before the prayer, the Shema, that's recited before retiring at night. Besides the evening prayer, we say Shema right before we go to sleep. And in that prayer, there are numerous very interesting prayers of protection, different reflections that we have before we go to sleep. And this is a very powerful prayer. There's a lot that we could discuss on this prayer, but we are going to focus for the purpose of our discussion on the very end of this prayer. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me, either physically or financially. How many of us could say this with absolute honesty? Either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine, whether accidentally or intentionally, inadvertently or deliberately, by speech or by deed, in this incarnation or in any other. So the first thing we see is that in our prayers, in a prayer that we recite every single day before we go to sleep, and it's this concept is, this prayer appears, I believe, in all of the major prayer books, because there are different versions of there are different what's called nischot, which called maybe versions of the prayer book that were almost like considered keys, different keys to the gates of heaven, and therefore the prayers have different alternations, different orders of some of the prayers. So if you go into an Ashkenazic synagogue, the prayers are in a slightly different order. Some of the words are slightly different. versus the Sephardic. Chabad has its own one, unique one, prayer book. But most of the major nuschot, as far as I know, have this prayer in it. Which means that we see that the idea of reincarnation is something central to Judaism. Now, it wasn't always. Going back in Jewish history, there were discussions about reincarnation, and there were many who argued that this idea is not a Jewish idea. However, with the teachings of Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic teachings, by the specifically by the Arizal, who lived in the 16th century in the city of Tzfat. So he, through his students, he talks about the Kabbalah. Actually, with the Zohar itself was written much earlier by Reb Shimon Bar Yochai about 2,000 years ago. But for many years, this idea was debated. But today, this is universally accepted. The concept of reincarnation is universally accepted by all groups of Judaism. So any evidence that we have for this is found in Kabbalah. And that's what we're going to study tonight. We're going to study text from Kabbalah or supporting texts of Kabbalah to be able to get some kind of appreciation, understanding what exactly is reincarnation all about. This is certainly not something that we would be able to come up with on our own. The first question that we need to ask ourselves is, how does the concept of reincarnation fit with everything that we've learned in the previous classes, that after leaving this world, the soul goes through rehab, and then ultimately, where does it go? It goes to the Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. It goes to the spiritual worlds. So how do we understand and appreciate what we've learned before, and together with the idea of reincarnation? Okay. One last thing before we go into the text, and we're going to be on page 177. One last thing that we have to just mention is that our class, of course, is going to focus on Jewish sources. There are a lot of discussions in other sources about reincarnation. We are strictly going to focus on Jewish sources so we get a clear picture and don't get mixed up with other sources, with other pictures of reincarnation. The second thing is that we are going to specifically focus on Jewish souls, although reincarnation could relate to others, and we are going to focus specifically on the mission of the Jewish people. So here's a history of the soul. So we're going to start to talk about the soul, because in order to appreciate reincarnation, we have to understand the development of the soul. We know that a soul is a part of God. And we know that it's a part of God because when Adam was created, it says that God created Adam from the earth, min ha'adama, which is why we bury someone. We spoke about this before. He came from earth and we returned the body to earth. And then, vayipach ba'apav nishmat chayim, God blew into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. And that is the neshama, which is the neshama is the very essence of the very being of God, the essence of God, nefesh elokah mimal mamish, a real part of God, in the sense that the difference between speaking and breathing and blowing is that when one speaks with air. You have to breathe in order to speak, right? I know many people don't. They don't stop. But you have to breathe in order to speak, but your breath is very little. It's a very external breath. Okay, so the communication is an external communication when we're speaking. It's not from the very depth of our being. However, if I need to blow, say blow up a balloon or something, or a beach ball, right? I have to breathe, or even sing. It comes from somewhere deeper, but even to blow is one has to really get air from somewhere very deep within. And that's the idea of God blowing, according to Kabbalah, God blowing into Adam's nostrils the breath of life. That the breath of life, the neshama, not neshama, actually, the word neshama comes from the word neshima, which means breath. So that's what neshama is. The neshama is the breath of God. And we have the breath of God within us, and originally it was given to Adam. So let's read text number 2. It all began with one master soul, the soul of Adam, which included all future souls. Subsequently, this master soul passed on to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It should have continued from generation to generation, but because of the sins, there was a gap. And it waited till Abraham, and then it continued. But then it started to sort of branch off, and was then divided among the 12 tribes. Afterwards, the soul was further partitioned among the 70 souls, the descendants of Jacob that accompanied him to Egypt, and eventually among the 600,000 souls who left Egypt. So we sort of understand this almost like a tree. If you have a tree, so first you have the master soul would be the trunk. Then you would have branches, which would be the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Shvatim, and then they develop into twigs and so on. But it's all part of the same tree. Text number 3. So basically, again, the soul started off on the branch, on the trunk, with Adam, and then it branches off into many thousands of souls. Furthermore, you must know, from Reb Chaim Vital, he was a student of the Arizal, and he wrote the previous text, and now again text number 3. Furthermore, you must know that every person must fulfill all of the 613 mitzvot. If a soul does not fulfill all 613 mitzvot, in action, speech, and thought, it must be reincarnated until it completes them all. Okay, so let me ask you a question. Has anybody here fulfilled all 613 mitzvot? Raise your hand. Well, you wouldn't know, because you don't know about the souls which came before you. So we don't know. But the point is that every single soul has to fulfill, that's the mission, the purpose of every single soul, is to fulfill each of the 613 commandments. Now, let's take a step back. There's a general mission, and then there's an individual mission. The general mission is for all of us to bring godliness into this world by fulfilling this mitzvah, the mitzvot. Each of us to fulfill all 613 commandments in order to fulfill that general mission. And then there's also a very specific mission that every single soul is given beyond the 613 commandments. So we come into this world to bring godliness into this world. We came here for a purpose. And in order to fulfill that general purpose, we have to fulfill all 613 commandments. In addition to that, there's also a very specific mission, which we'll talk about tonight, how we figure out what is that specific mission. Although most of us are not told what that is. So the history of the souls is first Adam, then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then it divides into the 12 tribes, then to the 70 souls of Jacob's family, and then the 600,000 root souls. Each one of them, regardless if you're a twig or a branch, you have the same goal, to fulfill all 613 commandments. So the soul's mission is, I have to make it smaller so I could see. Okay. To reveal God's presence in the world. We do that through fulfilling all the 613 commandments. And we also have our specific mission to rectify and elevate both body and soul and our area in this world. However, there are some issues with this. I could tell you from today till tomorrow that you need to go and fulfill every single one of these 613 commandments. Now I know most people don't even know what all the 613 commandments are. But many of the commandments can only be done by a Kohen in the temple, which excludes me. I can't finish all 613. I don't know if anybody else here can. So if you're not a Kohen, you're not able to fulfill all the 613 commandments. The other issue is, even if you are a Kohen, if you're not living in the time of the temple, or you live during the time of the temple, however, you weren't living in Israel, you're not able to fulfill all 600 those commandments. So there are many commandments that we have to be in a certain place. Many of the commandments have to be done in Israel. Many of the commandments are only done by certain people. So we're not able to fulfill all 613 commandments. There are also, besides not being able to do all of them because of who we are, there's also place and time, and then there are also certain circumstances that allow certain commandments. For example, there is a mitzvah in the Torah called the mitzvah of Yibum. What is the mitzvah of Yibum? Does anybody know what the mitzvah of Yibum is? Okay, Yibum, if I translate it, maybe you'll know. I don't know the exact translation, but I'll tell you what it is. The mitzvah of Yibum is that if a man is married and he passes away and his wife did not have any children, there is a mitzvah from the Torah for if he has a brother, there is a mitzvah to marry the wife, the widow. So there's a mitzvah in the Torah that the brother should have children with this wife to be able to continue the legacy of his deceased brother. That's the idea. The idea is to be able to keep his brother's legacy alive. However, the Torah says, practically not everybody's going to want to be able to marry, not everybody gets along with their brother-in-law, and not everybody wants to marry their brother-in-law. And therefore the Torah says that there is a process called chalitza. And if you, the man and the woman do not want to go through the yibum, the marriage, so then they have to go through this process called chalitza. It's not divorce, but it's the concept of separation. Now, the first thing we understand is that you can't do both. Even a person who is in the who has that opportunity to do yibum, for example, cannot do the other mitzvah of declining the yibum. And if they decide to decline, they can't do the yibum. You can't do both. You're either going to do one mitzvah or the other. In other words, it's impossible for unless guy marries and then and then the other brother dies, right? Hopefully not. But I actually once taught this to students of mine, and one of the kids said, "I never heard that anybody did this before." It does happen, unfortunately, that someone passes away and has a living brother, but they'll usually do the chalitza, which is the declining. And when I was teaching this, the student said, she must have been a fourth grader, and she said, "I think my mother did that. She was married to a man, to her father's brother. These are Iranian Jews, and apparently they did the yibum where her father was the brother of her mother's previous husband. Okay, deceased husband. But the bottom line is that we can't do all mitzvot. And therefore, because we can't fulfill every one of the 613 commandments. However, all souls have to fulfill all the 613 commandments. We got no choice. Therefore, there is a concept of reincarnation, allowing the soul to complete its mission. And what's the mission? But first, I'll tell you a little story. I don't remember all the details to the story. The story with all the details and the drama of the story, I'm going to skip out because I don't remember all of it, and I didn't have time to look up the details. But the principles of the story, the main points of the story, I'll share. So we mentioned the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was one of the greatest leaders of Kabbalah of all times, very spiritual individual. When I was in Israel, I did it a couple times. I went to Tzfat, to the holy city of Tzfat. There is near the grave of the Arizal. First of all, I've been to his synagogue numerous times. But there is a mikvah, a ritual bath, that is still from his time, that is not heated. It's thank God they clean it once in a while. But if you go on a hot day, the water is freezing. So when I went in April, May time, I remember it being extremely, extremely, extremely cold. But when I went in March on one of our trips, it wasn't that cold, and I realized that the hotter it is outside, the colder the water is going to be when you get inside. So it's sort of a cave. Anyway, the story was that there was this older bachelor, 40-year-old, who came to the Arizal, and he told the Arizal that he's having a hard time finding his beshert, and he wants to get a blessing and advice. And the Arizal tells him that he should travel to Alexandria, to Egypt, and he'll find his spouse there in Egypt. He travels to Egypt, and lo and behold, he meets up with a young girl, a 20-year-old girl, and there's someone, I believe it was someone made this match. He gets married. The father-in-law is a wealthy guy, gives him 1,500 or 150 silver coins. So a lot of money. It was a wonderful marriage. The only problem was that the marriage only lasted for 3 months. This young girl suddenly died. And he was devastated. He came back to Israel, went to Tzfat, to the Arizal, and he said, thank you for the blessing, but if I knew the pain that I would go through afterwards, after these 3 months, I would have preferred not to travel there. Thank you for your blessing, but didn't turn out to be such a blessing. So the Arizal, who is this great master of Kabbalah, tells him, I want you to know, do you remember, he says. I want to, go back in your memory a little bit. You're 40 years old. 20 years ago, you co-founded a bakery. And you co-founded this bakery, and there was I don't remember if it was a partner or, yeah, the partner had given him some grief for 3 months, and then there was a loss of 150,000 silver coins. So the Arizal says, you were always very upset about it. It was very difficult. The soul of this guy eventually died. The soul of this guy ended up having to come back into this world to fix up the pain that you had gone through. Okay, so you went through pain for 3 months. And this soul, because it caused you so much pain and so much financial loss, that soul had to come back into this world. How did that soul come back into this world? It came back into this world, into the soul of this young girl. She was born with that soul. You had to wait 20 years for 2 reasons. First of all, throughout this time you were pained, but you couldn't marry the girl before 20 years old. She was too young. So you had to wait. And that's why it took you so long to find your bashert. You then had 3 months of a wonderful, wonderful experience. This was to make up for the pain that you went through and that grudge that you had on this guy from 20 years ago. That's how the Arizal explained what happened in that situation. Now, I don't profess to understand what happened there, but that was the reality that the Arizal shared. There was a story also with the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, where a family were childless, and then he gave them a blessing. The child came into this world, lived only a few years, and also there was some story that this was some very high soul that needed to come back into this world to fulfill a mission. The point is that souls come back into this world in order to fulfill something that was missing. Now, what do we have to do here? So the first thing we understand is that we have a mission, and in order to fulfill the mission, when sometimes the mission is not fulfilled, we have to come back into this world. Now, there are a few pieces here that we haven't clarified yet. There are some very, very missing pieces that are missing that will make us a little bit uncomfortable, because who am, as I said before, like, who am I? Am I myself, or am I the soul that had to come back into this world to rectify? What did I do wrong? What did I miss last time? What's going on? How do we understand it? What happens when Mashiach comes, when all souls will come back into this world? Will the soul come back into me? Will go back into the previous guy? So these questions we'll be able to answer tonight. Okay, we'll bring clarity to this. But what exactly do we need to do? So here we have text number 4. You should also realize that each individual must study all 4 of the Torah's layers, which are referred to by their acronym Pardes, which means orchard. These are Pshat, and we'll go through each of them, Remez, Derush, and Soid. There are 4 levels and understandings, interpretations of the Torah. To be able to allow you to appreciate all these 4 levels, JLI, instead of giving me that job, has prepared a little video for you. So I will play the video. Let me make sure that I have given you sound. I hadn't. Yep, so now I'm giving you sound. Watch this video, and then I'll come back to summarize it.
authors express themselves in their works, both directly and subtly, sometimes intentionally and always subconsciously. When we read a text, we can choose either to read the lines or to engage in more intricate analysis and read between the lines. The divine author of the Torah did something similar, but to an infinitely greater degree. God expressed himself in the text in multiple ways all at once, directly as well as subtly, with plenty of insinuation and a vast hidden layer of the divine subconscious. And he then instructed us to excavate it all. Jewish tradition separates these layers of understanding into 4 categories. The first is pshat, direct intention, which is derived by examining context and syntax. For example, the Torah begins with the words, Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashemayim, ve'es ha'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On the plainest level of Torah understanding, this is a straightforward statement of what happened at the beginning of time. But the simple meaning is not always easy to clarify. Many biblical commentators, most notably Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, the 11th century French scholar known universally as Rashi, devoted their efforts to clarifying the straightforward meaning of the often mysterious biblical texts. Our second layer of understanding is remez, allusion. This refers to subtle communications that are encoded in the text. They can be uncovered using methods such as the numerical values of the Hebrew letters, the acronyms of words and phrases, or unusually sized letters in the Torah scroll. For example, the Torah's first 2 words, Bereshis bara, in the beginning, God created, carry the numerical value of 1116. That's the identical value of the phrase Barosh Hashanah Nivra. It was created on Rosh Hashanah. We are thereby informed that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of creation. Our third layer of understanding is drush, interpretive. Our sages extrapolate a vast corpus of ideas and instruction from the Torah's text through methods such as textual comparison, sequencing analysis, and homiletical interpretation. For example, from a sequencing perspective, the Torah begins with the wrong beginning. It describes creation, a narrative that is seemingly secondary to the Torah's primary function as a book of guidance that tells us how God expects us to act on a daily basis. The Torah should have dived directly into the nitty-gritty of the laws. On the interpretive level, however, the Torah first describes creation to tackle a major hurdle to Torah observance. The majority of Torah laws rely on the Jewish nation owning and settling the land of Israel. We were instructed to conquer the land and never relinquish our claim of ownership over it. But such a radical claim to a territory is bound to provoke opposition. Who gives us the right to take possession of a land and claim it as our eternal heritage? The Torah, therefore, begins with creation, clarifying that God is the creator of all territories, and he has the right to permanently bequeath a specific parcel to a particular people. It then records the history of God doing precisely that with the Jewish people. With this switch in sequence, the Torah supplies the Jews with the response God expects them to provide all who accuse them of land theft and occupation. The fourth layer of understanding is sod, hidden meaning. This refers to the deeply mystical messages that float behind every phrase and letter in the Torah. For example, the word Bereshis can be split perfectly into 2 words, bara, shis, meaning he created 6. God first formed the 6 emotive divine attributes, from chesed, kindness, through yesod, attachment, as described in Jewish mysticism. God then used these 6 attributes to create the actual universe. So there you have a sampling of the 4 layers of understanding that can be found in the Torah's very first words. Beyond this, a vast ocean of knowledge is contained in these same words. And beyond that stretches the infinite vastness of wisdom contained in the rest of the Torah's close to 80,000 words.
So we have, let's have a look, the pshat, the simple explanation. We have the remez, the hints and allusions. We have drash, expounding. And we have the sod, which is the esoteric. So, it sounds simple, 4 different levels. You want to learn them? Go open up a Torah book, and you will learn the pshat, the simple. Maybe you'll find that in the basic commentary. You'll go and study a little Talmud, study a little Kabbalah. But the truth is, each of us comes with our own appreciation, understanding, unique approach to every one of these levels. And so within each level, within the level of pshat, within the level of remez, within the level of drush, there are 600,000 different ways of understanding. And our job in this world is to try to study Torah so that we can reveal our own understanding and make the Torah ours, which is why it says in a very famous prayer that comes from Ethic of the Fathers, Yehi Ratzon, page 179, text 5a, Yehi Ratzon Ufanecha, may it be your will, our God and God of our fathers, that the holy temple be rebuilt speedily in our days. And then it says, and grant us our portion in your Torah. What does it mean, our portion in your Torah? Because each of us has our own portion in the Torah. Each of us has our own unique way of understanding the Torah. So our job is to study Torah and find our unique way of understanding and explaining the parts of Torah that we learn. Text number 5b. And this is from a talk of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says as follows: as explained in numerous sources, the soul of each Jew has a specific segment of the Torah with which it's particularly associated. This explains the phrasing of our sage's statement, grant us our portion in your Torah. Our portion implies that each of us has a unique portion within the Torah. This concept is further expressed in our sage's statement that there are novel Torah concepts that an accomplished student of the Torah is destined to introduce. In other words, the entire universe anticipates the birth of this particular diligent student, awaiting the moment that the student innovates, meaning uncovers, this specific concept within the Torah. For this concept is this student's portion in the Torah. It's interesting that you know that Moses, it's a little bit off topic, but well, it's off topic of reincarnation, but Moses was able to see the future. And he was shown a vision of the future. He was shown a vision of Israel, and he was shown a vision of the future. And he saw Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages, sitting and explaining the crowns that are on the letters of the Torah, which was Rabbi Akiva's unique contribution to the study of Torah. And Moses was fascinated. Now, how did Rabbi Akiva know if this was Moses is sitting there and says, how does he know this? And one of the students asked the question, how do you know this? And Rabbi Akiva says, it's a tradition back from Moses. It doesn't mean that Moses knew it. Moses was sitting, he never heard this before. But Rabbi Akiva had the ability to be able to bring something that Moses was aware of, but with a new angle, with a new appreciation that Moses didn't have before. He knew the concept, but suddenly the whole concept came to light with Rabbi Akiva's interpretation and clarification. And this is something that each of us has the ability and the mission to study Torah and to try. In fact, the Rebbe encouraged very, very much that every single Jew should study Torah and should be mechadish chidushim, which means should come up with novel ideas in Torah. Now, sometimes they may not be accurate, but we should make an effort because that is part of our mission the mission of our soul, to come up with novel ideas. So, page 181, we go through a summary of what the mission of the soul is. And when we don't fulfill our mission in this world, of course, we have to come back in. And then we'll learn how it works. So let's go to figure 5.1, page 181. The first thing is to fulfill all 613 mitzvot. The second is to study the Torah using all 4 different ways of interpretation. And then we have to reveal our own unique part of the Torah. Now we'll go to text number 6, and we'll try to understand what exactly it means when we talk about souls being reincarnated. Am I not the unique individual that I think I am? Do I not have a unique soul? How does this work? So we're going to try to bring some clarity to this. Says Reb Chaim Vital, again, student of the Arizal, of Reb Isaac Luria. Although we've stated in numerous passages of this treatise that a specific individual soul was reincarnated in a particular person, and it was subsequently reincarnated in another specific individual, and so on, do not misread this as implying that the original soul itself is reincarnated repeatedly. So this is very important. It's not that the soul keeps, think of the soul as a ball that keeps rolling into another body. That's not what happens. Rather, each human soul branches out into innumerable roots. Every root contains an infinite quantity of soul sparks. With each subsequent reincarnation, a number of these sparks are rectified and they ascend to enjoy the rewards of heaven and dwell in the particular strata of Gan Eden that are appropriate for them. However, those soul sparks that were not rectified are reincarnated to provide further opportunity for rectification. So basically you have the root souls. And you could think of this in terms of DNA or in terms of a flame. That you have 613 sparks. And what happens is when a part of that soul does not fulfill its mission, that part of the soul branches out into a brand new flame that now has its own identity. So yes, we came from the same place. We each came from our mother. But we took on, when we were born, we took on our own identity. A very unique identity, even though we came from the same place. So yes, souls are reincarnated, but it doesn't mean that your soul existed as it is now in a previous body. That is not correct. It's a brand new soul, a new dimension that branched off from a previous soul that didn't fulfill its mission. And that's the purpose of the Gilgul, which is reincarnation, to elevate the sparks that have not yet been fully actualized. Ultimately, we want to elevate the soul so that the soul can go back to, as we said last week, the ultimate goal is to go back to Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. However, there are sparks that have to, some sparks are going to return to its source. And then there are some elements of function or mitzvot that we were supposed to do. Let's say we did something perfectly and we ended up missing one little element within that mitzvah. The soul doesn't have to come back into the world. What did we say last week? That if the soul messes up, whether in a positive mitzvah, misses a positive mitzvah, which brings light to the soul, or detail of a positive mitzvah, or a negative mitzvah, that's not a major something major that's missing, but rather a small detail. So then the soul will go through rehab, which is hell, as we discussed last week, and then it will move on to the Garden of Eden. But the parts of the soul, we have 613 commandments because we have 613 parts of the soul. And each mitzvah that we do, we elevate that other part of the soul. So let's say there are 5 parts of the soul that over the generations, the soul has now elevated all 608, but now there are 5 left that it hasn't elevated. Those parts of the soul will now branch out into new souls, into new identities, to allow that soul to be able to elevate. So what's going to happen? Do I have my own identity? The answer is yes, I have my own identity. Because this is a brand new offshoot of an original soul. And when Mashiach comes, I'm going to have my soul, and the other guy is going to have his soul that he elevated. So again, if we see souls as flames, as DNA, there's no end to the amount of souls that could develop from one original soul. So the mission of the soul is to complete all 613 commandments, to study all layers of the Torah, to reveal a specific portion of the Torah. So we have different parts. So we have the rectified sparks, mitzvot that were properly observed, and we have unrectified sparks, positive mitzvahs not performed, Torah violations which are transgressed. So the rectified sparks, when you fulfilled what you had to fulfill in this world, those parts of the soul, those parts of the soul's flame are going to go up to heaven, to Gan Eden. The unrectified sparks, those are going to become the foundational spark of a new soul, allowing the neshama to come back into this world to fulfill its mission. Okay. Now, most people in our class were of the opinion that soul reincarnation only happens in humans and not in any other parts of creation. Animals, inanimate. And the truth is that that could happen. But first, there is something else that we have to learn. We're going to get into that in a second. There's something else first. And that is that till now we're talking about Gilgul, which is by the most souls in today's world are reincarnated, which means they are offshoots of a soul that was previously in this world, which makes sense because most people had to fulfill mitzvot in the time of the temple. Then you have to come back to fulfill whatever was left. So that's what we're doing. We're fulfilling the last parts of the mission for our sparks, and then Mashiach comes because we've completed the mission. There is another concept. Besides Gilgul, which is the word for reincarnation, there is also another word which is called Ibur, which is impregnation. What does that mean? Text number 7a. The concept of Gilgul, reincarnation, is that a soul requiring further rectification enters the body of a child as it emerges from its mother's womb to serve as the newborn soul. It has no permission to leave that individual until the person's destined day of death. By contrast, the concept of Ibur, soul impregnation, is that a soul enters an adult body that is already inhabited by a soul. Now, we'll never know if that ever happens to us. The person's primary soul received at birth. So there is another soul, a spark of another soul that could sometimes attach itself to an existing soul in this world. In this case, the individual is merely impregnated with a guest soul in addition to harboring a primary soul. The individual then carries the extra soul much as a woman carries a child in her womb. There are two concepts here. So let's have a look at text number 7b. A soul's experiences ibur, impregnation, for one of two reasons. Either A, the impregnated soul comes to an individual for its own sake. In its previous life, it failed to perform a particular mitzvah and was therefore left lacking. This was the kind of mitzvah that was impossible to perform under the conditions of that lifetime, such as the mitzvah of yibum, chalitza, and the like that I mentioned earlier. Those getting married to someone who passed away. So it's going to be very hard for every soul to fulfill that mitzvah. How many times does that happen, the 600,000 souls? How many times does it happen that someone's husband passes away when the wife was childless and has the opportunity for this mitzvah of either yibum or chalitza? And therefore, in order to fulfill that mitzvah, either one of those mitzvahs, either to remarry the brother, to marry the brother, or to separate from the brother, the mitzvah of chalitza. So in either case, the soul doesn't have to come back for a full lifetime. What does it do? It attaches itself to another soul. It is therefore not obligated to engage in a full-scale incarnation described earlier in this treatise, for soul impregnation is sufficient. So all it needs to do is attach itself. I'm wondering if it's possible that more than one soul can attach itself to that particular soul during that mission. Anyway, the second reason that a soul would come in this manner, in this form, is the impregnated soul comes solely to assist an individual, to bring a person additional merit, or to guide an individual in matters of Torah and mitzvah. Maybe that's why we have inspiration sometimes. And sometimes we don't, because there's another soul or a spark that comes to our soul and gives us that inspiration. Maybe that's why sometimes we're more motivated than others. We don't know too much about this, but it gives us an appreciation that there's more going on in our life than we see it. In this case, the impregnated soul lacks nothing for itself. It's not coming for itself, but it's coming to assist the soul that's already that's in the body. So sometimes it comes for a special delivery. Okay. There were two guys who made up, very good friends, and they made up that whoever dies first is going to come back and give a full report to the other one, so that the other one knows what to expect when he goes. Okay? So, sure enough, Yankel is the first one to pass away, and Moshe, a few weeks later, he goes to sleep and he has a dream. And in his dream, he sees his friend Yankel, and he says, Yankel, so tell me, you came back to tell me what's going on over there, tell me what's going on. He says, I'll tell you, life is absolutely wonderful. I eat whatever I want. I sleep whenever I want. The sun is shining at all times. I'm surrounded by green grass, and it's just beautiful. I don't have a single worry. He says, it sounds like you're in heaven, in Gan Eden. He says, no, my friend. I was reincarnated as a cow in Montana. So that brings us to the question about, most of us were sure, confident at the beginning of class, that souls are only reincarnated in the body of a human being. And so we're going to see that according to Kabbalah, Jewish sources, this is not the case. Souls, they used to be cats or dogs that used to roam. First of all, in Tzfat, there were a lot of cats. Anybody been to the city of Tzfat? It's the Kabbalistic city. There are a lot of cats roaming around. Why do they say cats come to that city more than anywhere else, because this whole concept of reincarnation was sort of founded in that city. And so there are a lot of cats that are coming back. That's what they say. I don't know if there is any source in Kabbalah for this, but that's what they say. Okay, so I have no source to confirm this, but this is what people say, that the cats come back to as reincarnations of souls that have to come back for whatever reason into this world, and they come as cats. And sometimes in Jerusalem and sometimes in other places. We really don't know. That's the point. And the again, we'll talk about how this really helps us, but it also gives us an appreciation for what's going on in the world around us, that there's a lot more going on than we can appreciate, than we can understand, than we see.
But Rabbi,
Yeah.
for individual, that as a person, as a Jewish person, you get your neshama with the first cry, and animals are born already, they already have their neshama, so that differentiates us. So now it goes against what we were taught.
Okay. So animals have their own soul, true, which they're born with, which is a very different kind of nature of a soul. But the spark of a soul can attach itself to an animal just like it can attach itself to another soul. Another point that it mentions in text number 8, I'm not going to read it, is that that souls only come back. You know, sometimes we wonder, how many times does a soul come into this world? Does it come 10 times, 11 times, 100 times? So in text number 8, it says that the max a soul can come into this world. It comes the first time, and then it can come up to 3 times as a reincarnated into this world. So it's not like it's been recycled or branches off hundreds of times. It comes only 4 times into this world, a total. So let's have a look at text number 9. Behold, God does all these twice or thrice with man. That's the proof, the source that we have in Job. This concept that it comes only 2 or 3 times into this world. The limitation of twice or thrice applies with man, meaning that a human soul is not subsequently reincarnated in a human body more than 3 times. There's the first time, and then 3 times, 2 or 3 times afterwards. Rather, it is forced to wander the planet until it is reincarnated in an inanimate, vegetative, or animal entity. Then after it has done its penitence, then there is hope for its future, for God's endless mercies extend to all his creations. So the purpose why it would attach itself to an animal, to an animate, or to a vegetation is in order to allow itself to elevate, to become elevated. So again, there's partial reincarnation beyond what we spoke about of the general reincarnation, temporary guest soul, and then we also have the non-human reincarnation that after 3 unsuccessful attempts, or as a form of punishment to finish off what it needs to do, it comes into this world. Text number 8. Text number 10, page 187. It is impossible to deduce whether one possesses a reincarnated soul or not, unless one is the recipient of a mystical communication in this regard, which means we're never going to know, right, whether or not we have what we have. Are we a new soul? Are we an old soul? You may wonder, how then will we know the purpose for which we entered this world, which mitzvah we must be careful about to perform, or which transgression we must especially avoid? The answers are naturally ingrained in us. We experience natural affinity and longing to perform a certain mitzvah when the mitzvah is critical to our present incarnation, or our inclination strives especially hard to entice us to commit a particular sin, For it is the very same sin in which we blundered during our previous life. So, if you have a love for a mitzvah, chances are this is especially a mitzvah for you. If you're having a challenge in something that is a negative mitzvah, and you're really having a challenge, chances are that it's hard because this is something that's really for you. From our challenges, we can actually tell what is our mission. Now, a very interesting way of looking at when we're talking about souls, and to realize that we have our own identity, is that it's not really like putting in a hard drive. We take a hard drive out of one computer, we could put it into another computer. It's the same hard drive in a new body. That's not really what it is with the soul. With the soul, it's like taking the battery out of one computer. It's the energy. It's a new energy, new opportunity to be able, because the other computer is no longer alive anymore. So now we take that battery, which is still healthy, and we put it into the new computer, allowing it to fulfill its potential. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish. I'm going to try to read some of the texts here which talk about our you know what, actually, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip out text number 11 and 12, which really allows us to appreciate, and I recommend that you read it, a letter from the Rebbe, talking about how each of us, our mitzvah will challenge us. But I really want to do I see it's getting late, so I want to do the meditation for tonight's class, because I think with the reincarnation meditation tonight is something that will all appreciate and benefit from. So here's the meditation, and then I will conclude the class.
Today's reflection is going to help us try to relate to the idea that our souls came to the world this time around for a special purpose. A mitzvah, a good act that has special value in this lifetime. Now, how can we know such a thing? To a great extent, we can't. However, there's a way that we can catch a glimpse into what is important for the soul in this lifetime. And that is by way of a metaphor which we will now visualize. Picture in your mind's eye, you are leading an army out to battle. If the militarist...
Sorry. Try to get that again. Sorry. I don't know what happened there.
Today's reflection is going to help us try to relate to the idea that our souls came to the world this time around for a special purpose. A mitzvah, a good act that has special value in this lifetime. Now, how can we know such a thing? To a great extent, we can't. However, there's a way that we can catch a glimpse into what is important for the soul in this lifetime. And that is by way of a metaphor which we will now visualize. Picture in your mind's eye, you are leading an army out to battle. If the militaristic imagery is not to your liking, you can imagine a game of chess. Same idea applies. You're leading your army out to battle, And you begin to become aware that your opponent, your enemy, is focused on striking you in one particular spot. Now, it hadn't occurred to you that this spot has importance, but from the fact that the enemy keeps focusing on it, keeps going after it, we begin to realize that it must have strategic importance to the enemy. As you're imagining this, shift now and think about your life and think about a mitzvah or a good deed that is inordinately difficult for you. And by inordinately, what I mean is this. We all have mitzvahs that are harder and easier for all of us. But then there are mitzvahs that by all rights should be easy. It shouldn't be so challenging, and for some inexplicable reason, we just keep having resistance in that area. Why are we having inexplicably more resistance in that area? Why? Because it has that much more strategic importance, and therefore all things in the universe being counterbalanced, our Maker has allowed a special resistance, a special challenge to give us pushback in that one area that we most need to overcome. So imagine, connect to yourself, think of yourself, think of that area, that mitzvah that's the hardest for you, the one that keeps on challenging you. And now imagine it, rather than as something that you're frustrated about, imagine it as your most precious asset. So precious that the enemy is specifically focusing on it. Let's take a moment to try to think of that mitzvah that is the most difficult, and to now see it as that mitzvah which in this lifetime is apparently the most important and most impactful. We'll take a moment now to envision this, to connect to this feeling. Feel yourself being empowered, knowing that this mitzvah has so much power, so much influence, and that is where the resistance is coming from.
Okay, so in our lives, and we could see this on page 191, you have three generally different ideas that can help us recognize what we should focus on in our lives so that we can fulfill our purpose, our mission. Number one is our strengths and passions. Because those strengths and passions are given to us, uniquely to us, in order for us to fulfill our mission. You know, sometimes we look at people, or I shouldn't say we, there are many people who look at others who have talents and say, why wasn't I given any talents? So from this perspective, the reason why a certain person was given a talent, everybody has talents. Everybody has uniqueness. But the reason why that individual was given that specific talent or strength or passion was because those things can help that individual in their mission. It wouldn't be purposeful if you had that talent because you don't need it. You won't be fulfilling. That's not your mission. That's not your purpose. Our weaknesses and struggles are also indication of what areas we need to be stronger with in the negative. Our struggles means that we have to overcome those struggles. And the other thing is our circumstances. The fact that I ended up in Old Japan rather than another place, God put me here because I have a very specific mission to fulfill here in Old Japan that I would not be able to fulfill in another place. It's not because I decided to stay in the United States that I'm living in the United States. It's very clearly not. I've seen this in for many reasons. And the fact that I turned up at a certain date, I've seen divine providence, why I turned up here at a certain time. We're all here for a certain, and when we recognize, what can I do here in the place that I am in right now to fulfill my purpose and the purpose of all of creation, of in general, to fulfill not only my own individual mission, but the mission that we have collectively. That's also something that I recognize that again, I'm here in this place, not only to fulfill my individual mission, but I'm also here to help with the collective mission. And I can only help with that collective mission by doing my mission here in this place where I am. So our circumstances help us recognize our mission. So reincarnation, it enhances personal identity because it gives us, it's not that we are a soul that's been here before, we have our uniqueness, and not only that, we actually have a unique purpose. So recognizing that we're not just a soul that ended up coming into this world. We came here for a reason, we came here for a purpose, and a unique purpose. We also have the good deeds of the previous souls that get stacked up that actually support us and give us strength. And also we recognize that God has a master plan. There are many routes to get there, and each of us are given our unique spot in this world to be able to fulfill and to help materialize this master plan that God has. And then, of course, not only our unique purpose, but also our part in the general human mission is something that's also very, very specific, very important when it comes to talking about reincarnation.